where we go.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, the randos conversations are they're some of the best things on the channel, in my opinion. Because people are interesting. So let's start with you. You wrote me quite a bit, and you've obviously been living a very interesting life, and I don't know how much of that you want to share. It's your time, so use it as you'd like.
Okay. My desire is to be as open as possible, and that as far as I'm concerned, well, yes, I mean, in the end, you know, something's I'm going to get assessed in some way, so I might as well be open about it right now as to wait till later on.
The internet assesses all of us, trust me.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's start with your story a little bit, however much of it you want to share.
Okay. I had the most extraordinary dad. And my first question is, why would anyone want to know about someone else's dad who's long since died? But you know, that's another story. And he was an upper class English person, and his mother became a Christian, who was a vicar's daughter, became a Christian Scientist, because it was the social, you know, it was the high upper class alternative was to become a Christian Scientist. And he and you've taught me quite a bit indirectly about what Christian Science is, by the way. But
I know almost nothing about it. So
no, but anyway, so he said that you know, you just went to Sunday school, and you know, you went to a Christian Scientist practitioner rather than going to a doctor, and you know, life continued. And he went to Eton, you know, famous English school, and he was very successful, and he loved sports, and he was going to go to Cambridge, and he was the main person playing squash, and he was in some big competition out there, and he couldn't play because he had a knee injury. And his mother said, "Oh, phone up this man called John Dawley." And he had a 20-minute phone conversation and never had a knee problem again in his life.
Wow.
So as a 19-year-old, and this was just around the outbreak of the Second World War, this caught his attention. And so he became one of this man's students. And John Dawley was an Englishman who at one point was the head of the Christian Science organization sometime between the two wars. And then he came back to England, and he carried on studying and deepening his understanding. And the thing, I know very little about Christian Science, but the idea of Christian Science was that there was a science to Jesus's healing. And you understood the science, the process, then you could do the healings. And at one point, Christian Science did lots of healings, and those have all disappeared now. But that's another story.
That's fascinating. I know nothing about Christian Science, so this is interesting. Keep going.
And so anyway, John Dawley was tried by post for heresy, you know, for going beyond the founder's teachings. And he was found guilty, and his students, including my dad, were circulated and said, "It's not your fault, your teacher has gone off the rails. You can remain and remember, but you must not have anything more to do with this man." And Dad said, "How could you possibly not engage with someone who was showing you deeper and deeper truths in the Bible and was doing extraordinary healings at the same time?" So he found himself, that group found themselves excommunicated. And I think my dad was this man's favorite student. I'm not quite sure. But anyway, at some point, Dad found my mum, who was also one of the students, and he decided it was not time for him to go off and study the Bible and sort of go back to basics for himself. Mm-hmm. And then my mum tried to have a child and lost the first baby with spina bifida. And then I was and she said, apparently, you know, David, my husband, gives me everything, and I can't even give him a child. And so I think I might have spent 9 months in a state of high anxiety before I was born. So that was my beginning.
Hmm.
And but Dad didn't. I suppose he believed, and I have a younger brother who I would say after a year and a half, my life was ruined. Year and a half was great, and then things got wrong. And my mum had postnatal depression and stuff. But he didn't force his Christian Science or his. I mean, he ended up just calling himself a student of the Bible. He didn't. I think he felt that we should find our own way, and. So you go to school and there was bits of chapel, and then when I went to Eton, you would go to church or chapel every day, and beautiful stained glass windows and the beautiful teachings of Jesus. And then the rest of the time you were living in a sort of tyranny with the older boys, having a very harsh regime on the younger boys. You look down on the servants, you look down on the people in the village. That Eton is sort of spread through. So it was just a complete sort of contradiction of, so by the time I was sort of 16, I had become very cynical and sort of nihilistic and didn't believe in God, didn't believe in any of that stuff. And of course, at 16 and 17, you know everything, and it's so obvious. And I was actually very, Eton's a great place if you're extrovert. I was a shy introvert who was an undiagnosed dyslexic. So at school, the teacher would say stuff, I wouldn't understand it. I was way too scared to put up my hand. So then the rest of the lesson made no sense. So I'd sort of doodle and look out the window in which I was playing games. And but when it came to the exams at the end of term, there was no point not writing something. So I wrote whatever might be relevant. So my exam results were actually slightly better than average. But the master's reports, which were written at the same time, which is always not doing very well, this isn't really good enough. So my parents' attitude, oh, well, no, stupid teachers, what do they know? You're fine, which actually was not the right response. So, but there was the most extraordinary ceramics teacher at Eton. I hated painting and drawing, but when you did your exams to prepare you for going to university, we had to do some extra subject. And I thought, oh, I'll try pottery. I'll make some stuff on the wheel. And the master said, and he was the only person who only taught the boys who wanted to come and do his voluntary classes. He said, well, no, everyone wants to do stuff on the wheel, but ceramics goes back way before that, and people just shaped clay by hand. So you need to get to know it. And you just build it up level by level. And I was a very repressed, shy child, and these shapes just emerged out of the clay. And I ended up winning the ceramics prize, the sculpture prize, and all that stuff. And but I hated academics, and I did English, I did French, I did maths. I mean, and I sort of got average low sort of scores, and I could see no reason to go to university. And I also, well, I stayed on for an extra year or 2 terms, and I spent most of my time doing the ceramics. And I'd get up very early in the morning, and I could get out of the house I stayed, and I had a key, and I made all this stuff. Actually, I will try and show you just so you can get some flavor of it. That was one of the things I made.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And I think everyone thought that I was going to sort of become a ceramicist or whatever. And the trouble is, I could see that to make a living, I would have to produce things that people like the parents of my friends liked.
Yes.
And I could see a lifetime of exploring, but I couldn't see the usefulness of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can produce objects of great, but my dad spent his life, I should say, he'd inherited a lot of money from his father, who died when he was 13, who was an incredibly successful Bristol businessman, founded Bristol University and sort of stuff. But my dad spent his life devoted to his spiritual life, but doing good. He ended up running Bristol Council for Disabled and had a workshop for boys and girls who, were the hopeless ones at the end of school. And so I was very aware of a sort of social, that you should do some social good. And I had no identification with the elitist Eton, except for it gives you a wonderful arrogance that you believe that you can do anything. So I thought I'd do some ceramics. I didn't want to go to art college because I already knew what I wanted to experiment with, but I didn't have the discipline as a sort of 19-year-old.
Yeah.
So I eventually went to art college to do a design course. And it was great being a hippie and growing long hair and wearing greatcoat all the way through summer and, sort of smoking dope and all that sort of stuff. And then I came across hang gliding. And at that point, if you wanted to fly a hang glider in the UK, you had to buy a kit, and it came with an instruction book about how to fly it, where to fly it. There were no schools. And so some people, friends of friends, had this thing. And it was just obvious the most important thing you could possibly do was to get into one of these machines and jump off a hill. It was clearly, that was common sense. And so you read the book backwards and forwards until you could remember it, and then tried. And it was the most extraordinary experience. I was flying. I was a flying being. Yeah. I wasn't flying a machine. It was me flying, and then suddenly I was in another dimension. I could walk on the water, I could on land, I could swim in the water. And suddenly I was a being that could be in the air. So I was completely hooked. And I became, and we got another machine, and then we started teaching our friends, and we started the first official hang gliding school in the UK, which we called the High School of Hang Gliding. But actually, smoking doesn't go very well with flying hang gliders, but and so, but although I was the shyest, I was the best teacher because I could see what people needed, and I could give them just the right amount of information, the right amount of encouragement. So I discovered that I could teach, and then I also, by teaching others, I learned a lot about myself. But as we progressed with that, I got more and more depressed because I had this fundamental nihilistic, I don't believe anything, there is no God, it's nice flying hang gliders and smoking some dope and listening to some music. But, and I saw that I was definitely going to commit suicide. I could see on that path, there was no other. I mean, ironically, it would be an act of meaning in a meaningless world. I couldn't see that at the time. And somewhere around that time, I also read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which was the first book that I understood by reading it and rereading it and the underlying themes. And I got to I saw that I was only focusing on meaninglessness. And I thought, okay, if there's meaninglessness, there's also meaning. What happens if I look at meaning rather than meaninglessness? And I did a thought experiment, which I'm extraordinarily proud of. And I thought, I don't know how I could prove if there's meaning or not. So let's assume, there either is or there isn't. And let's say that at the point at which I die, I get the answer. So I can live my life as though there's meaning, and actually is. When I die, great, that's all good. I can live my life as though it's meaningless, and when I die, there's one brief moment of, I was right, and then it's all over and there's nothing. And that didn't seem to be, given the suffering I experienced with the meaninglessness, that didn't seem a great reward for being right. I could live my life as though it was meaningless, and it turns out to be meaningful, and that seems like a disaster. or I could live my life so it's meaningful and it turns out to be meaningless. Well, I'll have a fascinating time looking for meaning and doing all sorts of stuff that I believe is highly significant. And then I have one brief moment of disappointment. I believe it's rather like Pascal's wager.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
But anyway, I came up with it on my own. So I told this to Rupert Sheldrake, who I met once. And he was very impressed. So
I think it's great. I think it's Pascal's wager with respect to meaning. That's awesome.
yeah, and so meaning God, it's the same sort of stuff. So then I got involved with so I'd worked out that I should look for meaning. So how do you do it? And I talked to someone, and have you heard of Landmark? Anyway, it's part of Est. It was part of Est, or came out of Est, which came out of Scientology. And there was a particularly hardcore breakaway version in England called Exegesis. So, I'm looking for meaning, and these guys said, oh, well, that's exactly what we're delivering you. So I was a complete sucker for it. And it did teach me about responsibility. And not anyway. So, but by that time we developed hang gliding, towing hang gliding. We got into the first powered hang gliders, but eventually that company went bust. And I just have to throw in that my brother invented bungee jumping, and we got these microlights by the second jump, which was off the San Francisco Golden Gate Bridge. But anyway, that's another slide. But so during my hang gliding time, I'd met this man. We got involved with the first sort of skateboard. We had a skateboarding shop. So I guess this was sort of in the 70s, and the first when the skateboards were actually well usable. And this man turned up and he made some arm pads and knee pads for us. And he seemed a nice guy. And then, that stopped. And I bumped into him after the sort of the exegesis stuff. And we started to converse. And he said, well, no, you're a philosopher. Don't get lost in that rubbish. And it turned out that he was a member of a very small group called the Holy Celtic Church, which was basically an order which they called the Order of Dionysius and Paul. And it was Catholic, and it had the line of succession, but it was not Roman Catholic. And the man who founded it was, are you aware of the mystical Order of the Golden Dawn?
Oh,
that's terrible ignorance, Paul. I'm shocked. It was the Western mystery tradition in the late 1800s, nearly 1900s, and so it was sort of Rosicrucian, Kabbalistic,
yep.
What the Masons should be about. And I suppose so. Crowley is probably the most famous member of that.
Okay, yeah.
Who was way off the path. He was unrepresentative, but he's the one everyone knows about. And anyway, Alan gave me this little document called the Yoga of Christianity. And Dennis Green, the man who founded it, and he all of his Golden Dawn people said, look, Christianity is completely lost its way, it's useless. And he said, no, Christianity is the essential religion of our realm. It needs the true energy put back into it rather than to be abandoned. So this group consisted of one bishop and 3 priests and 1 deacon. That was the entire group. But this paper, The Yoga of Christianity, basically the starting point was the Bible's rather hard to understand, particularly if you haven't got Kabbalistic knowledge. And we're not talking about Jewish Kabbalah, we're talking about the Western Kabbalah.
Yep.
And he said the Bhagavad Gita is a beautiful introduction to the spiritual journey and the spiritual life. So we'll start with that, and then when you've got a bit more that, then you can in due course go into to what the Bible offers you. So I joined and I went through the stages and eventually became a priest. And I celebrated 1,000 masses, and many on my own. There were very few of us, and it was completely an inward-looking process for your spiritual development. There was nothing significant pastoral. We didn't have it was a house church thing, but we had beautiful sanctuaries, with all the symbolism. It'd be fascinating to see what Jonathan Pageau would make of in those. And lots of my friends had all sorts of mystical experiences and things, and I never got any visions. I never got anything like that. But what I did get was an extraordinary sense of peace during the Mass. It was almost like the air becomes thick. And I don't know, and I'm very curious as to whether you've had experiences like that. As a Protestant, you see, maybe not. I don't know, but it's an incredible sense of the most profound peace.
It's always hard to compare experiences.
Yeah.
Because I've certainly had experiences of profound peace, but to compare them with what you're talking about is tremendously difficult.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't know how, but I mean, our answer is, or what we were doing was that the Mass is to bring the light down. It's completely a magical, in terms of transformational process. But I didn't have any experience. You see, on one level, I think that almost certainly spiritual experiences are probably an impediment to true enlightenment, because it's another level of dualism, as far as I can see. But the part of me that was a skeptical doubter also said, well, is there really any God? Is there really any religion? And so I thought, because one level of meaning is you look for the spiritual and how you live a good life and so on. I thought, okay, but what if that happens not to be true? What's the most meaningful thing I can do with this life? And in the late 80s, I met this extraordinary man who was the engineer responsible for all the drains and the sewers and all how Bristol worked, the Bristol, the city I live in. And he was the closest to a genius I've ever met. I mean, he went to Bristol because he said it had the most interesting civil engineering problems of any city in the UK, and therefore he was going to have an interesting life. And he trained as a engineer in the Great Depression. And he said it was bizarre, because here was the most powerful nation in the world with the greatest resources, the greatest level of skills and knowledge anywhere in the world. And yet there was only one piece of significant civil engineering, although there was a vast amount that was needed, because there was no money. How could the most powerful nation in the world with all of those resources not be able to do anything? And so he gave me an education in the money system. And he also gave me an education in the environment, how environmental stuff worked. And I've become interested in organic growing and permaculture and those sorts of things. And I thought, we'd watch serious television, the sort of documentaries, and you'd see science and technology programs that seem to say there's nothing science won't be able to do. Science and technology is going to do everything. And I was completely convinced by it. And then you'd watch programs about the rainforests and stuff like that and environmental destruction. And I was completely convinced by that. So I thought, I don't know, I don't understand. And in '87, the UN had commissioned the World Commission for Environmental Development under the chairmanship of Mrs. Brundtland, the Norwegian Prime Minister. And they produced this thing called the Brundtland Report, or Our Common Future. And I thought, I think I can trust the UN. I think they are actually on the side of humanity. They might be a corrupt, whatever, but so I got this book. And I read the introduction. It was about 20 pages long. I could understand all the words. I couldn't understand it. So I spent a week of just reading it and rereading it. And eventually I realized it was because it was asking me to look on the one world from a detached perspective that was looking at a whole system thing, which that was why I couldn't understand it, because it was just outside how I thought.
Yeah.
And the message was really clear. We live in one world, which we all share. None of our institutions are set up to look after our one world. We've got massive problems of poverty and development, and we better get our act together. And they said sustainable development is what we need. So I thought, yeah, makes sense. And I had a friend who was a Quaker elder who was very well connected in Bristol, and he knew Oxfam, which is one of our big development charities and the World Development Movement. And we had a one-day conference in the council house, and we got the environment minister, who happened to be a local MP, and nothing came out of it. And everyone was too busy with their own little projects. And I thought, something really needs to happen. What can I do? And I thought, okay, I could try and become rich and powerful and influential, but what does the average individual who has no great connections, is nothing especially intelligent, isn't particularly articulate, et cetera, what can we do that makes a difference? So I set out on a path to say, well, what does make a difference? Permaculture is an amazing system, but it's completely alternative. No one pays any attention to it. I came across a wonderful Swedish man called Karl-Henrik Robert, who created a thing called the natural step. And it's, I heard him give a talk to the inner group of the Schumacher Society. And he basically said, I'd just like to tell you, just in beautiful but Swedish English, I'll tell you what I've been doing. And he said, I'm a scientist, I'm a medical researcher. He also happened to be a Swedish karate champion. And I just felt there was something wrong with how we're treating the environment. So as a scientist, I thought, what do I know? And I decided that I would see if I could create consensus among the Swedish scientists. So I wrote to the head of Swedish science and said, will you put me in contact with all the serious scientists? And the head said, well, you're completely crazy. All scientists do is disagree with each other. But I love what you're trying to do. I'll put you in touch. So Karl-Henrik wrote this thing, which he basically said, I believe this is the truth about what we know as scientists. What can you agree with, and how could you improve it? And he sent it to the top 20 or 30 scientists. And very quickly he saw he was going to get a high-level consensus. So then he said, okay, well, how do we get this out? So he went to the ABBA singer, who's an environmentalist. He said, all our scientists have worked this out. Would you help us? And Karl-Henrik is the most delightful, charming sort of bear of a man. His wife's a Jungian therapist. I mean, and so she said, oh, yes, of course. So then he went to Swedish TV and said that ABBA and I would like to present this. Would you do this? And they said, well, where's the money come? Don't worry about that. Will you give us a program? Then he went to, I can't remember, he went to the Ministry of Education, he went to the Swedish king, and eventually he said, he went to big business. He said that all of Sweden, we'd like to put this out. We haven't got any money. You're the guys with the money. And so so they came up with the money as people like IKEA and Electrolux and so on. How long do you think that took him?
It'd have to take a few years.
9 months.
Wow. That's pretty fast.
And so he formed this organization, and they sent, and this was the late 80s. It was an audio cassette and a booklet to every school, every household in Sweden. And it got a lot of traction. But he defined that they looked and said, what are the principles of sustainability? And they worked out, how do you make yourself unsustainable? And the way you make yourself unsustainable is very simple. You take stuff out of the earth and you spread it around fast and it gets reabsorbed. You create artificial substances and you spread those around fast and they break down. And life works because nature, plants, process stuff that all the rest of the living stuff eats. It turns sunlight into food. So what you do is you cut down your forest, you tarmac over your fields, and you reduce nature's ability to build the structure. And then the final thing is what you do is you use everything unfairly and inefficiently. If you want to be sustainable, you do the opposite. So all the companies supported him. So it became a consultancy which went around the world. There was really quite a big American one, and they taught businesses how to be sustainable, but it never got any traction. And he's now a professor of sustainability, in a Swedish university, and it's a very small consultancy that's mainly dropped away. So, but to me, it was like, what's going on that something as brilliant as that doesn't happen? So since '87, I've also had a track of how do we create a fair and sustainable society. And I've come up with the answer. I have the answer. And I call it systemic win. And one of the things I want to talk to you about is whether you think these ideas are in any way contradictory with Christian values. I don't think they are. I think they actually could help Christianity, because the thing is that we keep disagreeing and fighting with each other. And I thought, everyone's heard of the idea of win-win. And I always felt the problem with win-win is it's too easy for it to be the rich and the powerful to exploit and abuse the rest. And I thought, what needs to win? Well, I and you need to win, but if our environment doesn't win, we've got a problem. And so I said, well, what we need is, the system needs to win. So I call it systemic win. And the point of systemic win is I look after myself in a way that I can contribute to you. I support you in looking after your environment. And because we're together improving our environments, those around us value us, and it gets better and better. So I've been developing, how does this, what's the practicalities of it? And I've been an Alexander technique teacher, I've been a hypnotherapist, I've been a mediator, conflict resolution, and all that sort of stuff. But all of that's in service to meaning and to a sustainable, fair and sustainable world. And so, and I suppose what I've seen is, in some ways, I did a thought experiment. I thought, who do I like having as neighbors? If someone is really rich, they just, they live behind their gates, they've flashed cars, they've got all of that stuff, but they just pay no attention to their community. When something bad happens to them, the sympathy level for them isn't that great. At the same time, the other thing is neighbors who are just a disaster, everything goes wrong, they're also a nightmare. It's nice to have neighbors who sort of basically look after themselves. They're competent and they look after themselves, but they've got a spirit of community. So I thought, if you had a community where I do enough to look after myself, but I'm really making sure that my neighbors and my neighbors' neighbors thrive, and we're all doing that together, I think that's going to work rather well. So what stops us doing that? And the thing I've been thinking about is, and maybe if the people watching this, I'll get the feedback. People like Brett, who I love what he and Heather put out, but I despair of his materialism. And and a whole bunch of these people always talk about, oh, game theoretical. And I thought, and I came years ago across the finite infinite games stuff and CAST, I think it is, and I thought there are only three games. There's a zero sum of win-lose, there's a positive sum, and there's a negative sum. Now, which game do we want to play? No one wants to be in negative sum, because the longer you play, the worse the less there is for everyone. Win-lose is pretty miserable, because Pareto principle, those that win get more and more, and Jordan Peterson's analysis, it's way bigger than the problem of capitalism, is spot on.
Yeah.
But okay, I'm going to ask you a question. What is life? Life in evolution on Earth, is that zero sum? Is that positive sum? Is that negative sum?
Oh, life seems positive sum.
It's absolutely a positive. You
yes.
can't possibly be anything else. I'm fairly sure that most of, you see, science also seems to be, and maths all seems to be based on zero sum. Okay, so here I'm going to go stupid. People seem to think we're in a physical universe. How do we know that? We're somewhere in the middle. We don't know when the beginning was. We don't know what the future was. We're biological stroke spiritual things. All our constructs, to say it started with the material, that's just a human construct. Biology is the only bit that we know about, and we have no explanation of how biology started. No one has anything credible about it. It started, and ever since then, it's been a positive sum game. And biology, what it does is it changes its environment. We're not on a fixed planet. The first life was anaerobic, and it produced toxic oxygen, which it couldn't survive in, so it had to go underground, had to find little places to it. It changed its environment, and its environment has been getting more and more complex ever since. And now the other thing is that no simple creature could possibly look after its environment, whether it's its inner environment or its outer environment. Evolution takes care of all of that. So evolution is an extraordinary positive sum game. But we're living life as though we're in a zero-sum game. People talk about finite resources. Well, there's infinite amounts of sun coming in, and the more life, the more niches. You can overuse the resources, but it's there are limits, but it's not finite. So it feels like we're just playing the wrong game. And the other thing, one of the other things I've thought a lot about, which is, as far as I can see, any living creature can only really do three things. Mainly, we ignore. So you could say ignorance and ignoring, but ignoring is a form of engagement. It's just we cannot pay attention to that.
It's selecting other.
Yeah. And if we engage, it's either some sort of competitive engagement or it's collaborative engagement. Why do we do so much competitive, antagonistic engagement? I mean, I love what Ian McGilchrist is talking about, and in his take that essentially we have to have two sides, two brains, because one side has to look after just finding, aiming, eating, basically, and the other has avoid being eaten. That's why you have to have two different consciousnesses running side by side. But all our success is due to collaboration. What's the internal competition in a cell? All these people saying competition is the first thing. No. Competition is critical, but it's only part of it. And we simply don't pay enough attention to getting the balance right between collaborating, competing, and ignoring. And so it seems to me that we're in this most bizarre time where things could go amazingly well, but we're right on the knife edge of them going the most horribly wrong.
Yeah.
And evolution isn't threatened. No, evolution, even if we set off all the atom, life, the evolution process, it's just precious human beings who are the center of the universe. And so I'm really interested in how we create systemic win communities.
Mm.
I've been saying,
keep going.
No, anything I've said that you think is silly?
No, no, not at all. I think you've done a lovely job of sort of breaking things down into fairly clear choices and looking at some menus here. I liked your analysis of, you have a wealthy neighbor, the wealthy neighbor puts up a big fence, they live to themselves. Something bad goes wrong with the wealthy neighbor, everybody in the village is like, well, serves them right. They were, we didn't care for them anyway. There is definitely something to, a degree of equality among neighbors with respect to a whole variety of things, because that helps neighbors sort of connect with each other. If you have one neighbor who's fabulously wealthy, another neighbor who is insanely needy, either of those seems to sort of put the system out of whack. It's better if you have neighbors who are at least to a degree self-sufficient, but also interdependent, and they kind of get a nice homeostasis of having sufficient to help one another, and yet not taxing each other with respect to, if you look back at what you talked about in terms of sustainability, let's say a sustainable community of neighbors sort of keeps the right balance, where each are sort of being able to maintain themselves, but not too much so that they don't need each other. So in other words, you've got a degree of sustainability within the one system, let's say within the homes, but yet there's another layer, and this is where I'm going to get, there's another level of community where they're interdependent among the different, let's say, if your households are made up of nuclear families or extended families, then you've really got sort of two levels of a system. Now, this gets into a lot of the stuff that I'm getting into now with respect to the Peugeot-Weinstein thing, because
I was listening to that today and yesterday, and I was so pleased because there's the whole which we perceive. When you go into more detail, it turns out to be sub-wholes, lesser wholes, parts, and it's an infinite regress.
Yes.
And the other way, you see that the whole is actually part of something greater.
Yes.
And there's infinite regress of greater wholes.
Yes.
That's why humans, we're in the middle.
Yes.
We're in the middle in space and we're in the middle in time.
Yes. And we're in the middle in terms of the two registers. We're material, we're the stuff of earth, and we're the breath of heaven. I mean, it's those things too.
We're angels and animals, yeah.
Yes. And so you very much need, and obviously you have that within a household too. Within a household, each of the individuals within the household, you get a system of both enough sufficiency for each, and then also a degree of dependency upon one another. And you need that mix right as well within the household. And we get that in terms of even down to ourselves and within ourselves, just like you said.
Okay, let me give you another concept. Because on the one side, you have selfishness, and the other side, you have self-sacrificing or altruism.
Right.
The people who are, selfishness, as I understand it, really is a 2-year-old. It's narrow and short term, and there's no sense of consequences. And self-sacrificing and altruism means that you burn yourself out, and therefore you can't provide sustainable help.
Right.
So it's a bit like, you're on either side of that. So I'm going to say in the middle, there's self-interest. And I'm going to say it's systemic self-interest, because there's a wonderful, I think I heard it from Jordan first of all. The Homer Simpson's just drunk a quart of vodka and mayonnaise, and Marge says that's not a very good idea. And he says, no, it's fine, no problems. Big problem for future, Homer. I'm sure glad I'm not that guy.
That's right.
And that's but that's how most of us treat our future selves.
Yes.
So this, and the other thing, back to what you're saying about the family, is our sense of self expands and contracts. What you do as a single person, I haven't got a family, one of the biggest mistake of my life is not, but that's another story. The single person does whatever they want. Once you get with your partner, you're actually the family. You don't think from just I, you think from the family. The great and the awful political leaders, Churchill, Stalin, all of those things, they thought of them massively expanded. Equally, when you cut yourself, your whole experience is your finger. So ourselves expand and contract, and so I'm going to say that what we need to do is to really pay attention to our systemic selves, which the whole thing about family, neighborhood, etc., then starts to become manageable.
And it's so to jump on to a lot of what Peugeot has been talking about. So let's talk about the system of the neighborhood. So we'll use that word, because that word system, we can that's a word we're fairly comfortable with and familiar with, because we're sort of used to dealing with systems. And so the word doesn't necessarily scare us. Now, if we talk about the consciousness of the neighborhood, that's a little tougher, because we experience consciousness, as a person here, and we have intuitions of the consciousness of the neighborhood. We're very subtle creatures, and we're always watching each other. And so if we look outside and we see, let's say, we see a fight between the neighbor and his wife. And when we see our other neighbor seeing the fight between the neighbor and his wife, suddenly we have intimations of the consciousness of the neighborhood. But that's not actually the level of consciousness that we participate in it, but we certainly don't control it. And all of the thing now, we might participate in it by talking to our one neighbor about the other neighbors who are fighting. We might participate in it by, let's say, bringing a casserole or a food dish or something over to the neighbors who are fighting, maybe not drawing attention to their fight, but just saying, here, I cooked a little extra today, and, it might make your life easier if I share some food with you and you don't have to cook tonight, et cetera, et cetera. And so we're participating in that consciousness. And again, I think your questions of sustainability are very subtle. And the difficulty is that they're at these other levels of consciousness, of joint participation, that we participate in, but we don't control. And so then what we do as human beings are we create these systems, we create principalities, we create organizations that actually sort of level up. They have greater power, because now suddenly they begin to impact many other systems. I mean, let's say you spoke about your friend who was this engineer who worked at Bristol, because Bristol had the most interesting, the most sophisticated, I had to look up where your city was, because I didn't know exactly where it is, but it's
the second highest tidal difference of any city in the world.
Okay, I figured it had something to do with water. Yeah. And so, obviously the organization of your municipality, let's say, or city, or whatever area, region, developed a very robust something in order to engage the tides and to deal with, let's say, rainfall and water and drainage, human sewage, waste management, all of this has to be. So what we've done is we've created all of these very powerful robots, these systems, these machines, but those machines, of course, interact with all of these other systems that, again, we are in the middle of. We're not terribly conscious of them because we've never felt ourselves terribly responsible for them, only in the ways that, let's say, if the river floods, now suddenly, it's got our attention. So these, I think you're right in terms of thinking about systems, and you want to win-win. You want to win for the systems that we're not terribly conscious of, but we're dependent on, and that impacts us. And we want win-win between those and the systems that we're creating for all of our own needs, even that come down to your neighborhood. Because, for example, let's say suddenly the wastewater system for your neighborhood has a problem, and nobody in the, I don't know how in the blocks that you live on are able to flush your toilets, and you've got raw sewage coming up through your loos. Now suddenly everyone in that system, even the rich guy is out on the street, and all the poorer neighbors say, yeah, we feel for you. We might only have one bathroom and you have 7, but you've got 7 times more stuff coming up out of it now than we do. So, so you're right, thinking in these terms.
So let me give you another element. So I did stuff called developmental behavioral modeling, and I did a thing called systemic leadership, which was fascinating. But you could say that the basic system is self, other, and others in a context, and that then goes up and down. So you could say it's in, from, and to would be another way of looking at it. Or you've got detailed, scope, connection. They're all different things, but they're all fractal. And so I would say that you have 3 fundamental roles. There's a leader-follower dynamic, and which tends to be focused and loses perspective. And you need the facilitation between the two, which is the system awareness. So as a mediator, I'm trained to be impartial. I don't believe in that. I think I should be multi-partial. I should really care for one side. I should really care for the other side. And above all, I should care for the well-being of the system that they're part of. And I have more interest than just them working out a solution if I'm truly responsible. So a lot of what you could say, some people have a bigger awareness. This is why we have to have leaders, because they're attuned to that next level up.
Yes. Yes.
And there's one thing I want to say is, with conflict, we have, as far as I'm concerned, the conflict is only over when you are somewhere better systemically than you were before the conflict began. If you haven't achieved that, you're still in a conflict, and you're therefore in a contaminated environment in which people are not going to help each other. So we have our conflict threshold completely in the wrong place.
Yeah, yeah.
And then there's another one I want to throw in, which is the past, we are trashing our pasts. We are making our past worse and worse and worse. Now, if you were doing that in the present and you were making your present worse and worse, would that be wise? If we were looking at the future and all our plans were to make it worse and worse. So we're actually being completely insane by all our woke stuff of trashing the past. And one of the things that I've realized that I'm trying to do in my life is I'm trying to be at peace with everything that has happened to me, that I have done, that others have done. And I do want to tell a story about my dad and his dying, because well, first of all, his spiritual his teacher, he got ill and old, and he was sort of being nursed and seemed to be unconscious. And he suddenly sat up in bed. The doors are open, and I'm going through. Lay down and was dead. This was this man, John Dawley, which I think that's rather good. And Dad, he was 80, and he'd always been fit and healthy. And I got a call from my mum at sort of 5 o'clock in the morning. I lived 10 miles away. Said, there's something seriously wrong with your dad. And he'd never seen a doctor in his life, so there was no question of calling an ambulance. And I went over there, and he'd collapsed in the bathroom in the night. My mum had slept through it. He dragged himself back to bed, and he was barely talking, but he was incredibly peaceful. And I said, Dad, this seems rather serious. And it took him, it probably was 5 minutes, because there was an incredibly long gap between each word. He said, Paul, you have to realize I'm completely happy to die, and I'm completely happy to continue to live if there's something useful for me to do. And whichever is right is what will happen. And then he sort of lapsed back into peacefulness. And there was someone who'd helped my mum with kinesiologist stuff with her breast cancer. And I knew that Dad liked him. So I rang him up and said, would you come and see Dad if he'll see you? And so I said, will you see Julian? Oh, it wouldn't do any harm. And he came over and he did some of his magic and got some digitalis from some foxgloves, and Dad sort of came back into normalness. And for a week, he was fully coherent and present. And my mum returned some of the nursing he'd been doing for her. And exactly a week later, got up. My mum was awake this time, went to the bathroom, came back and said, how are you? I'm absolutely fine. Just had a nice drink of water, lay down and was dead. And he had heart failure, kidney failure, I mean, his body was done.
Yeah.
But, and I thought, it'd be nice to live in that attitude. I'm sure he did. I'm sure that wasn't, that he just came to that. I mean, he spent, for the entire time that I knew him, which would be 50 plus years, he always got up at 6:30 in the morning and spent an hour contemplating a verse or two of the Bible. And he wrote a book on St. John's Gospel called Truth is Timeless. And as a young man, he wrote a book called Listen for Yourself about Mark. Yes, so how do we listen for ourselves? How do we help each other live a good life? And how do we help each other look after this amazing world?
Yeah. Those are three tremendous questions. And
I've been playing with, you see, in the only instruction in the Lord's Prayer is to forgive. The only active thing that I can identify is give us this day our daily bread and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those that trespass against us.
Yeah.
And then I've been playing with love the Lord your God with everything you've got, heart, soul,
mind and strength. Yeah.
Mind and strength. And love your neighbor as yourself. And in one of the Gospels, but I'm not sure which one it says, and it's something like, and the second is as the first.
Yeah.
Now you'd know that because I've been playing with, am I loving God with everything I've got right now? Am I loving my neighbor as myself? And I tend to be critical and decide that I'm not doing it very well. So I'm trying to work out, what do I do at that point? Because, yeah, anyway.
Well,
carry on.
I think it's wonderful. And I think, to go back to the systems we were talking about, because, to whatever degree that we have responsibility for these other robots that we create, these other machines and systems that we create, we certainly must love our neighbors and the world. And, for a lot of people, when they have the question, well, what does it mean for me to love God? Okay, sort of understand what it means for me to love my neighbor. I might say that's probably not as clear as we intuitively see it, but let's go with your first impression with that. Love the neighbors around you, so on and so forth. But to love God is in many ways to love the systems, the human systems, the systems we inherit. And obviously, because we're small, we can sort of only love the systems around us. And so you love your mother, and you love your neighbor, and you love your city, and you love those systems. And love means to work that dance of the self-sacrificial and the, as you said, also it's the self-interest in a way too, and to participate in that love, and that love then scales. And it seems to me that you've done a tremendous amount in your life, pondering and thinking, and it seems, just in this little hour that we've been talking, participating in it, because you've developed a lot of wisdom. What you said too about when you're doing conflict mediation, it seems to me you're exactly right. The two individuals have to be at peace. He has to win, she has to win, and the system has to win. So let's say if you're talking to a married couple who is unhappy, he needs to win, she needs to win, and the marriage needs to win. And if the marriage wins, well, then probably the children are going to win too. And so, we tend to get lost in, we sort of levitate up and imagine we have this monarchical vision where we can look at the whole world. But just like with your neighborhood, there might be a spirit of the neighborhood, there might be a neighborhood consciousness, but you're seeing the neighbor watching the other two neighbors fight, and that's the level of participation that you have to have. And well, maybe if you're on the city council, or if you're on the wastewater treatment district, or wherever that's, you're gonna work with the engineer, and hopefully the Bristol wastewater treatment system will bless the earth and not get too out of whack with the earth, not produce so much wastewater that the river and the estuary can't really process it, and so the fish die. And it's all of that stuff that we actually do. But I think one of the things that I love about this conversation is I think it's been tremendously rich, and I've taken a lot of notes all the way in, because one of the things that you've managed to do is sort of break things down into nice little couplets and triads all the way along. And that's just tremendously helpful to sort of pause and say, oh yes, he should win, she should win, the marriage should win. But you've done it in a way that, the house number 1 on the street should win, number 3 on the street should win, and the neighborhood should win, all along the way. So, well done, I think. Well done.
I mean, you see, I think we need to do much more stuff in threes. Well, you probably need 4, because you could say there are 3 roles to play out, because the leader follower are going to be going backwards and forwards. And, this is the Ian McGilchrist stuff about the master and his emissary.
Yeah.
But you've got to have that system awareness. And in some ways, you've got to have the system awareness of the system awareness, which is almost a backup.
Yes.
And I've developed a little conversational process that I call slow dialogues, which SLOW stands for speaker, listener, observer, and witness. And the way I've worked it is you actually have 5 minutes, but the easiest way to do it is in threes: speaker, listener, and observer. So the speaker has 5 minutes and it's their time. The listener's job is to listen in a way that they could feed back if it's what's wanted. And the observer just notice what's going on and keeps the time. And after 5 minutes, and it works very well on Zoom, you swap roles. It doesn't matter whether you're incomplete or not, but it creates a shared, it's the dialogos, actually. It's a way of creating it very quickly. I had a thing, friends trying to create a trust, whole trust process. And what we did is we talked about trust. So there were 3 of us and didn't know each other. First of all, we said, okay, each person has 5 minutes to give 2 examples: high trust, low trust. The next round, okay, what builds trust, what undermines trust? The final round, where have you got high trust that you should value and use, and where have you got low trust you need to build it? And we got incredible insights that came from us sharing in that way. But because we made it 5 minutes, and because you become fluid in the roles, I would love, I should start participating in the Discord if I could work out how to get on it. You could probably send me some. Everything
I don't know if Discord would be your best forum. I'll certainly send you the invite, but
no, I mean, but somewhere. But I think also an estuary. I stumbled across it. From all sorts of other things. It just works in a magical way, and you can also adapt it, and you can do fantastic conflict resolution because you have two supporters, so you don't have the conflicting parties directly. I mean, it is so rich. It's but anyway, I'm trying to create some systemic win societies, and I would love it to, if it happened to come through through what you're doing, and that I think it could be magical.
Well, we will share this and we will see what bubbles up, because, I think I never know where the videos go, but I know that I have a significant audience in the UK, and some of the people that I've been talking to aren't terribly far from you. I can think of an Anglican priest who is not terribly far from you. And I would love to, you would be, I think a lot of people hearing this are going to say, I'd love to have a conversation with this guy. And I would love to be a part of something where his wisdom where I can capture some of his wisdom, because you clearly have developed an immense amount of wisdom in your life. And you're also a systems person. So it's clear you want to, you understand that the wisdom that you have been given is not really your own, but it has to be given to others, and for it to bless the world and for us to bless each other. So I'm
going to give you a challenge. I'd like this to be the first randos thing that you feel obliged to make a commentary on.
You have put this has been an intensely rich conversation. My notes, I often take notes, almost always take notes. I have probably taken minute for minute as many notes on this randos conversation as I have on any, because you actually have you both told your story. You've got a very interesting story, and you told it very well. And then you began sort of unpacking a whole bunch of wisdom, but you had it in all these tiny little triads. So it's a bunch of the things that you have noted. I may take some of these things and put them into some of my videos, because there's a lot in here, but I do hope that we can sort of take this and, either maybe start an estuary around it. Vendonk doesn't watch all my videos, but if I point one to him, he will watch it. And there's a chance we get to Europe this summer. So I don't know what can happen, but I don't know if I'm going to have time to get to the UK, but if I do, you definitely would be one of the people I would love to shake hands with. So we'll see.
Right.
Well, let's leave it at that.
It's been a complete pleasure, and I'm deprived of knowing more about you, but bit by bit we all glean vast amounts about you. So I felt it was more useful for me to talk about my stuff. So
no, and I'm certainly glad that you did. And again, I can't wait for to see what people do with this, and then we'll see what we can build on it. So that's wonderful.
What I particularly want are people to be hypercritical of it, because people are going to be hypercritical.
Yes, they are.
We're on the wrong side, and I mean, see, the thing is, who in their right mind doesn't want it to work for you, for me, to work for you, and to work for those around us who we care for.
Yeah.
It's like, it is something we can all agree on. And then actually you could use it for all of the different religions to be able to agree about, actually we want systemic win.
Yes.
I should give the definition, by the way. Systemic win is the conscious decision to play a positive sum game, or to create a positive sum game around the games that we're currently playing, whether they're win, lose, 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 whatever it is. But we have to contain it, because that's the reality. That's what nature, that's what the environment, we are in a positive sum game. For God's sake, let's play a positive sum game.
Yes, yes. Well, I will send you an email with a Discord invite, so you can see how Discord isn't terribly user friendly, and it's a little much for a lot of people. I keep
following the links that just says you're not allowed.
I'll make sure you get on, and okay. I will also shoot you an email with John Van Donk, because once you are very much the kind of person that John Van Donk enjoys, because he loves creating systems. He loves creating systems of conversations and relationships. So he's and so that's what he does with his Estuary Leader Support Network. And
I enjoyed the two of you conversing. I mean, there are very few of your things I do not watch. I mean, you are. I think you're the top of my YouTube. I mean, of course I watch Peterson, and John Vervaeke. I haven't been able to find the energy to get into it. But you see, in some ways, systemic win is the non-religion religion that he's looking for.
Yeah, I see. Again, I think I think he's difficult to penetrate, at least initially, but personally he's tremendously he's a tremendous conversation partner. So I'll see what I can do, but I hope this conversation is the beginning of a whole lot of flourishing. I'll say it that way, because I think you've got a world of things to give, and people will be plenty critical in the YouTube comments. Don't you worry. You'll get plenty of that. And some from those who share the island with you. I've got a few in mind who are gonna have things to say, but
yeah, good. And Paul, I am so glad that you're doing what you're doing in the world.
Oh,
and
thank you.
And if you were if yours would be the first church I'd actually want to join. I'm not a very good group member, but I would want to go and hang out with you and your elderly ladies, and
they are a precious and interesting bunch, I'll tell you that. Okay, Paul. Well, I will. This will get posted within a number of days. I had two amazing conversations today, both of whom I'm just terribly eager to get out. But but I will send you some emails, and hopefully we can see what this is the beginning.
And if you could send me a copy so I can send a couple of my friends to it, but that'd be great. But no, do it whatever's easy. I know you've got much too much to do. So
a copy of what? A copy
of this recording.
Oh yeah, I'll send that right out to you.
But I'm very happy for it to go out. It's
okay. Very good, Paul. Wonderful talking to you, and I hope we get to talk again.
Yeah, I should be disappointed if we don't.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.